It's the 17th of January 1872. We're in the princely state of Mela Kotla in Punjab, India, where a group of around 60 Sikh men are in very big trouble. Within the next few hours, every single one of them would be literally torn apart, their bodies obliterated as they were blown from the mouth of a cannon. One of the most spectacular and violent executions ever devised. They are members of the Namandharis, also known as Cookers, a reformist Sikh sect. The Cookers had adopted an increasingly defiant anti-British stance, actively opposing colonial rule and policy. After a recent and desperate raid on the state armoury, they have been rounded up by the British authorities. To the local British administrator, a man named Mr. Cohen, this wasn't just unrest. It was an outright insurrection against the iron grip of the British Raj. And for such a direct challenge to imperial authority, this particular form of retribution was chosen as the most brutal and terrifying method of execution in the Raj's arsenal. Under the colonial justice system, the Cookers were granted no formal trial. Instead, Deputy Commissioner Cohen himself would decide their fate. That final decree, delivered with chilling swiftness, sealed their unbelievably savage end. They were all to be strapped to the business end of a cannon and mercilessly blown to bits. The process began by wheeling the cannons, typically 9-pounders, onto the parade ground and arranging them in a long line. Before these guns, the condemned Cooker men were brought forward, often in batches and arranged in rows. Each man, in his turn, was then marched forward. He was stripped of his upper clothing and his back was placed against the cold, dark muzzle of the gun. His arms were then stretched taut and lashed securely to the wheels of the cannon on either side, forcing his spine and torso into the mouth of the gun itself. Each man was utterly immobilized, forced to face the ranks of soldiers and witnesses who had assembled to watch his annihilation. And the actual process hadn't even begun. With a stern command, a soldier would apply a slow match to the touch hole of the cannon. There would be a hiss, a flash, and then a deafening roar that would hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow and reverberate through the waiting lines of prisoners. And here's where it gets so much worse than you might think. The British often would use blank cartridges, no cannonball, because the purpose wasn't just to fire a projectile through the man, but for the expanding gas and fire of the gunpowder explosion itself to be the method of execution. The effect was to instantaneously and utterly disintegrate the victim's torso. One contemporary account from George Carter Stent chillingly described, "When the gun is fired, his head is seen to go up, straight into the air, some 40 or 50 feet, the arms flying off right and left, high up in the air, and fall at perhaps 100 yards distance. The legs drop onto the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun, and the body is literally blown away altogether. Not a vestige remains." As one of the Cooker men felt the rough ropes on his arms and the cold iron on his spine, he would have heard the final order shouted in a language not his own. He would have had only a second to offer a final prayer before his world was engulfed in fire and thunder. The blast would have ripped his body apart, sending a red mist of blood and viscera and bone fragments flying for well over 50 yards, showering the ground and sometimes even the soldiers and bystanders in front of the gun. As one British soldier who witnessed an execution wrote, "The scene afterwards was a perfect Golgotha, with heads and arms and legs lying about in all directions." Another contemporary report notes how several spectators were hit by razor-sharp fragments of bone, some having to have their limbs amputated afterwards. The air would have been thick with the sickening stench of gunpowder and fresh gore. Birds of prey circled above the parade ground and execution place, and swooped down to catch pieces of human flesh as they flew through the air. The terrible spectacle was intended to instill fear in the onlookers and, for many, to deprive the victim of a proper burial, thereby, it was thought, barring their entry into paradise. We know that the Cookers faced this fate with an unbelievable courage because a British officer present recorded it. He wrote that they died with utmost bravery, shouting "Sat Shri Akla," God is the ultimate truth, with their last breath. But for the men who survived to witness the next execution in the line, the ordeal was horrifically psychological. They would have had to stand and watch their comrades be vaporized one by one, waiting for their turn. While the British infamously employed this method, its grim history stretches back much further into Asia. Executions by cannon or blowing from a gun was not a British invention, but a practice with deep roots in the region. It had been used by various powerful states, notably the Mughal Empire and even the Safavid Empire in Persia, centuries before the British arrived. For these imperial powers, it served not just as a means of execution, but as a public spectacle, designed to demonstrate absolute, terrifying authority. A potent message to those who dared defy the state, a public dismemberment that aimed to leave no trace of the body and thus, perhaps, no hope for a traditional afterlife or a martyr's burial. While the British practice of execution by cannon built upon the long regional history, it was during the 1857 Indian Rebellion that they turned this into an almost industrial form of reprisal. What made the British use so infamous was its scale and its cold, calculated application as a tool of psychological warfare against a population they deemed mutinous. It was, as the National Army Museum describes, an extreme statement of violence which served as the ultimate sanction of imperial rule, the bodies of the victim being effaced and onlookers spattered with blood and gobbets of flesh. For the majority of unfortunate individuals who endured this horrific punishment, the end would come swiftly. But that wasn't always the case, and one of the best records we have for the sheer horror of this punishment wasn't when it went well, but an account of one that went horrifically wrong. One soldier who was there wrote about the botched execution where the condemned man somehow slipped from his bonds at the point of firing. To quote the witness, his arm was nearly set on fire. While hanging in his agony under the gun, a sergeant applied a pistol to his head, and 3 times the cap snapped, the man each time wincing from the expected shot. Finally, another soldier had to put the man out of his misery with a rifle. This has all been pretty dark and troubling so far, so I'd like to end on another story from that day in Mela Kotla that frankly blew me away. And although it still involves gruesome details, it's such a banger of a story of pure defiance that I just have to share it with you. Among the 66 men sentenced to die that day was a 12-year-old boy named Bishan Singh. He was so young that the Deputy Commissioner's wife reportedly took pity on him and begged him to renounce his guru and his case, in exchange for which his life would be spared. He was a child. They expected him to break, but Bishan Singh did not break. Instead of begging, he did something that no one could have predicted. As recounted in contemporary Kuka sources, this 12-year-old boy, filled with righteous fury, jumped up, caught hold of the beard of Cohen, and did not let go till both his hands were severed. His body was cut to pieces. He became a martyr. He died right there, not from a cannon, but from an act of incredible, suicidal bravery. So yes, quite a story, and a testament to the fact that even in the face of absolute annihilating power, the human spirit can find a way to fight back. For the British, execution by cannon was an ultimate expression of control, but for a 12-year-old boy from Punjab, a fistful of an Englishman's beard was the ultimate expression of freedom. If you like stories like this one, digging around into the raw and often brutal truth of the past, then I'd love for you to join our community. Please consider subscribing to the Raw History channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss my next video. It genuinely helps to keep these stories alive and to help this channel to grow. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one.